In this video, we will demonstrate the application of joining tables together using the join keyword in a SQL statement or a query. The question we wish to answer lists the vendors and the state names they are in. We have to play a little bit of detective work now. Let's assume that we're using the AP database. We will give you that much information, but in order to answer this question, we need to find the two tables, one that contains the vendor names and one that contains the state names for those vendors. Let's expand the tables folder. There's a table called vendors. That's a pretty safe bet that the vendors are in the vendors table. If we expand the vendors table, we have a field called vendor name, which is probably what we want based on that question that we are answering. If this becomes unclear, if the number of tables, the number of columns is overwhelming, and you don't have the information about the database that you need, it is completely appropriate for you to ask someone with that information. Don't struggle for days and days. Don't guess. Make sure that when you create your query, you're using the correct tables and the correct columns and joining the tables in the correct way. We found the vendor name. In the same table, there is a vendor state. At first glance, we might think we have all the information we need in the vendor table, but there's a clue here that there's a problem. The field vendor state is 2 characters wide, which cannot contain a state name. Ohio is 4 characters, for example. If we glance at the contents of the table, we can select Edit Top 100 Rows. We see that the state is 2 characters wide, which is not the state name, it's the state abbreviation. And the question we're trying to answer is asking for the state name. We need to dig a little deeper then. Fortunately, we're good detectives, and we notice a table called state. And we look in that table and we see a field or an attribute or a column called state name. When I give you queries to write, I will expect you to have a simple understanding, a basic understanding of the contents of the database, because we will have used it before, or it will be semantically familiar to you, and I expect you to perform this detective work. There will not be overwhelming, there will not be guessing, there will be an obvious correct answer when you try to find a piece of information in a column or in a table. We see now then we need to join 2 tables. We need to connect the vendor table and the state table in a query, and the output of the query, the result set of that query, should be 2 columns, vendor or vendor name and state name. To create that query, we click on the new query window and we select the AP database to tell SQL Server that the query we are about to run is against the AP database. By the way, make sure you are logged on with your AP credentials to do this work. If you are not logged on with your AP credentials, you will not be able to see these tables. Our select statements, our queries, always start with the word select. We can type that in. We need to specify, as you read in the book, the fields that we want to be in the results set. The field that we want from the vendor table is vendor name. And we're always using an alias because it's good practice. The other field that we want is from the state table. Alias for that. And then we begin to specify where this data is going to come from. The squiggles The red errors are okay. The reason we get an invalid column name error is because we haven't told SQL Server, we haven't told SSMS what tables we're going to read from. It has no basis for verifying the vendor name or the state name. That's okay. Let's pick the two tables that we want. We want the vendors table, and then we need to specify a join, and then the other table, which is state. That connects the two tables together. Now, does this work? Incorrect syntax near state. We see that SSMS, acting as a client, a front end to SQL Server, is unhappy with the syntax of our query. We need to provide more information. As you read in the book, we create an on clause. We tell SSMS to tell SQL Server what fields are common or connected between these two tables. In this vendor table, the field that we're interested in providing the connection for is vendor state. And we tell the query that vendor state in the vendors table connects to state, vendor state, connects to state code in the state table. Let's give that a try. Click execute, and we get what appears to be a correct result set. We have vendor names, and we have the states in which those vendors are found according to their address. So this appears to be a reasonable response to this request. List the vendors and the state names they are in. There are still some questions though. How did we know that the common field between the two tables is vendor state in the vendor table and state code in the state table? The only way we can figure that out, given this scenario, the AP database, is to look at the two tables and figure it out semantically. State code appears to be two letters that appear to be state abbreviations, and in the vendor table, vendor state appears to be two characters that appear to be state abbreviations. Again, we're playing a little bit of detective. Now in the real world, you're going to have some documentation, and you're going to have places to go to learn, to understand what the relationship is between the two tables. You'll have a design document, you'll have some pictures to look at, you'll have resources such as database administrators, people who create the database and may be more familiar with it than you are. Again, after some detective work, after a moderate amount of effort, I do expect you to try to figure this out on your own. You are certainly in the right to ask for more guidance on that in the real world. You will be thrown into databases with hundreds of tables, with hundreds of fields. The field names may not be easily understandable to you because they were created by someone with a different frame of reference, different culture. So you have every right and you have the professional expectation to ask someone to find these relationships or to point you towards the document that gives you these relationships. Don't guess. If you guess and you create a result set that looks reasonable but is actually wrong, you're just creating technical debt at your company that someone else has to repay. Thinking more about this query, as we've talked about in previous exercises, we may want to make it more readable, and we may want to order it. How about ordering it by vendor name in ascending alpha order, and then inside of each, that won't make sense, will it? There'll be one vendor. Let's look at this anyway. There we go. So we're alphabetized by vendor and the state name for that vendor. What if we swap these? That's really what I wanted to do. What if we say state name and then vendor name? Now it will first order by state, and within each state it will order by vendor. We had a minor glitch there as SQL Server went to sleep for a moment, but we are okay. Running the query gives us state names in alphabetical order, and within each state we have the vendors. Arizona has 2 vendors, AT&T and three. AT&T, Computer Library, Wells Fargo Bank. California has a whole bunch of vendors. Florida has 1 vendor, Naylor Publications. Illinois has 3 vendors. So the order that we present the information can be grouped together by specifying the order of these fields in the clause. And this is not a bad response to this question. List the vendors and the state names they're in. We've provided that. We've sorted. As we've talked about before, this particular request does not specify sorting, but sometimes it's nice to put that in if you're thinking ahead and you expect that your customer might come back to you and ask for more information. Even digging a little deeper, this query will become the result set for a printed report or a PDF or a web page, and the person designing that particular instrument will probably resort the data for themselves in the order they need. You're not locking anyone in to this order. You can sort as you like, but rest assured that someone who uses this result set to complete their work may resort the result set all over again, and that's fine. That's the way we expect people to work.